Points of business here. The first is there's 3 boxes of baked goods up here that are ready for a happy home somewhere. If you would like to have any of these, you're welcome to take one home with you, okay? So please come up here and explore. The second matter is this. It has to do with our course of study, what we've been doing. We've been looking at character studies in the books of the book of 1 Samuel, and we're almost at the end of 1 Samuel. Okay, you see where we're at. We're in chapter 29. 29 and 30 I hope to cover today. And then we have the sad closing story of Saul and his sons that we will be covering next week, God willing. That may take 2 weeks because there's a witch thing in there somewhere that we have to deal with, and that's a weird one. The question is this. We've had about 22, 23 weeks now of Samuel. Would you like to continue into 2 Samuel? Or would you like to take a break, go to the New Testament, do a New Testament book, and come back to Samuel? I'll let you guys think about that and discuss it for a minute.
So we thought about it?
Well, I'm letting people ponder. I'm letting people ponder.
Pastor, I for one, I'd like to stay on the subject so we get it all in.
Okay, stay on Samuel, you're thinking?
Yep.
Yeah. A bunch over here saying stay on Samuel. Okay. I didn't know if people are getting worn out.
That's interesting.
It is interesting. It's a lot of politics and intrigue. And I didn't know if folks were saying, well, let's do some doctrine or something, but we learn lessons from life from the stories, don't we?
Oh, there's lots of stories. Lots of stories in the Bible.
Lots of stories, yes, and we need those. Okay, we will do that then. We will continue on into 2 Samuel. When they wrote the book originally, there was no 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel. They divided that because of how long it was. It's a manuscript thing, it's a practical thing, and not a content thing. They drew a line there. So very good. Let's jump then into 1 Samuel chapter 29. And we are skipping a few chapters that present David in similar situations that we have seen before. David continues to flee from Saul and to spare Saul's life. So we've talked about that in one example, and there's more examples of that in the book. But we're going to jump forward to new circumstances that arise to test David and his troops and his family. So let's have somebody read chapter 29, verses 1 through 5. Chapter 29, verses 1 through 5 to get started.
Now the Philistines gathered together all their army to Ekron. The Israelites pitched by the fountain which is in Jezreel. And the lords of the Philistines passed on by hundreds and by thousands, but David and his men passed on and they warred with
Achish.
Then said the prince of the Philistines, what do these Hebrews here? And Achish said unto the princes of the Philistines, I lost my place.
You lost your place, okay.
Okay, just a minute.
You're in the middle of verse 3.
It's
Yeah.
not this.
Is not this David, the servant of Saul, and the king of Israel, which hath been with me these days or these years, and I have found no fault in him, since he fell unto me unto this day? And the princes of the Philistines were wroth with him. Make this fellow return that he may go again in his place, which thou hast appointed him, and let him not go down with us to battle, lest in the battle he may be an adversary to us, for wherewith should he reconcile himself unto the master, should it not be with the heads of these men. I'm having a hard time today.
Oh, are you? Okay, I'll finish out verse 5. Is not this David, of whom they sing to one another in dances? Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s. So there is that discussion that's taking place among the Philistines. What do you think? What is the concern of these lords or princes of the Philistines? What's their concern? Did you catch that? They're wroth, the King James says. They're wroth about something. What is it that's bothering them?
I think he'll turn on them.
Okay, so David is not a Philistine. He's an Israelite. He's been displaced from his kingdom, and he's come and found refuge among these Philistines. And now he's doing things like going off to battle with them. And David has fought on their side before. But this situation is a little bit different. Who are they going to fight now?
Saul.
They're going to go fight Saul and Israel, okay, where David had formerly been allied. And they're remembering that moment, back to Goliath. They're remembering how Goliath was defeated by David, and that sparked a whole bunch of defeats by the Philistines. And they're thinking, we can't trust this guy. We can't trust him when we go into battle with Israel. Where is David in his soldiers' position? Where are they stationed?
In the rear.
In the rear. How would that be especially risky for the Philistines?
Well, you mean to the rear.
You've got the Israelites and David and his men already behind you. You're flanked before the battle even starts. Yeah.
It says that David has slew 10,000 and Saul 1,000. Does it mean David is a mightier warrior than Saul?
Yes. Yeah, that's what the women were singing.
It said that 2 or 3 times throughout.
Yes, that's what the women were singing when David came back from his battles. They were celebrating his victories, and they were contrasting him with Saul, who had been struggling. Saul started out great, but he was declining and struggling.
Would you think that David, after he slew Goliath, that this built this great confidence in him? Because before that, he was a shepherd. He wasn't a warrior.
Right, right.
And all of a sudden, he's this great warrior.
Yeah, so I think it's a combination of natural talent going on with David, but also he's been chosen by God, hasn't he?
Yeah.
He's been set apart by God, and he's prospering for that reason. But in the meantime, the people are kind of poking fun at Saul by this song that the women sing as the men come back from battle. which doesn't help the situation with Saul at all, does it?
So you think that the confidence that David knows that God is behind him, that he can just do anything?
Yeah, well, David struggles though, doesn't
Well, he
he?
was scared in the last
Yeah,
Sunday,
yeah,
he was
we-
afraid.
Yes, we saw in the last episode how he pretends to be crazy
Yeah.
because he's afraid of the Philistines. So I think David has, like so many of us, has high points and low points in life. Maybe high points of faith and confidence and low points where you're just not sure. And you struggle. And even Jesus, when he was surrounded by people seeking his ministry and wanting to be a part of things, Jesus would do things like go off by himself to pray. And, or just, go off with the disciples somewhere. As human beings, we get overwhelmed, don't we? That's something we struggle with. It's hard to be up front all the time. I can say that as your pastor here week in and week out. It gets a little overwhelming sometimes.
Did Jesus on the cross ask God, why have thou forsaken me?
Yes, yeah, he's quoting Psalm 22 when he prays that.
Okay.
Yeah, so even Jesus, according to his human nature, is going through deep, deep personal struggles.
Yeah,
So it's no surprise that David would
Yeah,
as
he was
well.
man also, not just.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
He's
okay.
true God and true man. So we see both of those things happening in Jesus' life. Yeah, Jim?
They may have been concerned about their goats.
They may have been concerned about, the goats came up earlier. Yeah, no goats this time, Jim. No goats.
How are they gonna feed all those soldiers?
They're gonna steal the goats, maybe.
No, eat them.
Oh, they might eat them on them. Let's have somebody read on, verses 6 through 11. 6 through 11.
Then Achish called David and said unto him, Surely as the Lord liveth, thou hast been upcoming in with me, and the host is good in my sight. For I have not found evil in thee since the day of thy coming unto me this day. Nevertheless, the Lord's favor thee not. Wherefore, now return and go in peace, that thou displease not the lords of the Philistines. And David said unto Achish, But what have I done? And what hast thou found in thy servant, so long as I have been with thee unto this day, that I may not go fight against the enemies of my lord the king? And Achish answered and said to David, I know that thou art good in sight, and as an angel of God, notwithstanding, the prince of the Philistines hath said, He shall not go up with us to the battle. Wherefore, now rise up early in the morning, for thy master's servant and that are come with thee, and the sun, as soon as ye be up early in the morning, and have light hearted. So David and his men rose up early to depart in the morning, to return to the land of the Philistines. And the Philistines went up to Jezreel.
Okay, thank you, Mark. So there we see the progress of this. Achish, who is the lord over David and his men, pulls him aside to ask him some questions or to tell him what's going on. David's the one asking the questions. Interesting situation here for David. Can you imagine if you were put out of your country, put out of the United States, and you had to seek refuge in another land for the sake of your own safety? Can you imagine taking up arms with that other nation to attack the United States?
No.
No?
You think that's why,
I got military men answering this question.
you think that's why they told him just to go on?
Yes.
You mean the Philistine
Told him
leader,
to
Achish?
depart, that way they wouldn't have to worry about him maybe,
Yeah, they're,
going on Saul's side.
yeah, the Lord of the Philistines the lords of the Philistines are worried about David turning on them.
Right.
His direct lord, this Achish fella, is not worried about that, or at least he says he's not. He says he's not. And he tells David he can retreat, go back.
But the princes of the Philistines are worried about it.
They are worried.
Yeah.
They are worried. But imagine, put yourself in David's sandals for a minute. And being in that position of attacking the United States. Because that's what their army is about to do, isn't it? They're going up to Jezreel. They're going to fight with Saul and his army. Those are your former men in arms. What an awkward thing this is. How awkward that would be. Creates strong feelings in us as we think about such things. It really is a test of one's patriotism. It sounds like David's ready to do this, though, doesn't it? It sounds like he's ready to go fight on the side of the Philistines against Israel. I hear Hosanna.
Boaz didn't have much of a choice, did he?
Say again?
He didn't have much of a choice.
He didn't have much of a
Under the
choice.
circumstance.
It's a real trial for David, isn't it? And this isn't the last trial. David's gonna, as we'll see here in chapter 30, he's entering into another awkward and difficult situation. They just one after another comes and tests David. Do you think maybe God helped change the minds of those Philistine lords, so that David wouldn't have to be fighting against Israel? That's something that came into my head. I wondered that. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that directly, but I find myself wondering that.
That's a possibility,
That this was the mercy of God, that he was being turned out instead of taken along. Yeah.
Well, I mean, when Israel went up against other nations, didn't he cause some confusion and like cause the enemies to turn on each other in certain
God has done that. God has done that in different battles in the Old Testament, where they fight against one another. We had that in the story of Gideon, for example, in the book of Judges. So yes.
You think God did that because the saying is he won't put anything on you that you cannot handle? So maybe he thought that might be a little much for David.
David's had more than his share, hasn't he, of trials here. All that he has gone through. And I suppose in its own way, it's preparing him for the leadership he will provide as he comes in as king. Yeah, Mark.
Yes, they're afraid of David because their troops may follow him and do as he wants instead of what the princes and the lords of that land want. So they have to have him go behind, so this way he won't be able to influence them on their decisions.
Yeah, influence possibly, but I think they're also just afraid of attack. They're afraid David is going to take up arms and attack their backs.
Yeah,
And
get
going
their
back to
people
Saul.
to join, get the Philistines to join in with him, since they have fought with him before, they know how he is. They say they would follow him because they know that they would believe that they still have, that he has God on their side.
In the history of warfare, you see a lot of this kind of a thing where someone will side with one part, with one ally, and then in the middle of the conflicts they'll switch.
Isn't that true about
Those things do go on. So the lords of the Philistines.
Arab lands?
Say again.
Isn't that true about a lot of the Arab lands with their wars, where they'll be on one side and then all of a sudden, okay, I'm going over here.
They'll switch back and forth. Yeah, I don't know enough about their specific history to say, but these are conflicts. You think about the relationship between the British and the French, for example. A pretty stormy relationship over the centuries, and yet they were allied with the French in World War I and World War II against the Germans and their allies. But they had been, in the past, been combatants, and if you talk with the people on both sides of that, the French and the British, they don't have there's not a lot of love there. That's not always being
At one
expressed.
time, the French wanted us out, also out of their country.
Well, the French sided it with us during the Revolution, didn't they?
Yeah, but at one time later on in life, because I was at Stratcom headquarters in Germany, that's because it was in Paris and they kicked us out.
Oh, did they? Okay. Yeah.
They no longer wanted us there.
Politics is messy business.
Yeah.
It is messy business. Yeah.
That's a good example of being against your own people, the American Revolution. Because they did not give the people the rights of an Englishman.
Oh, okay.
But I was gonna ask you, were these Philistines in the army as well, or they just were all David's people?
David has rebellious Israelites that have followed him, and they've gone over to fight on the side of the Philistines. So he's joined himself to them for his own protection. But that doesn't necessarily, in the Philistines' mind, that doesn't make him so reliable.
Well, that might have been a threat with all those people coming in their country, because he's there. He had 100,000 soldiers.
We were talking about this yesterday at guitar practice. You talked about the fellows who left the U.S. during the Vietnam War and went up to Canada.
Right, right.
Yeah, that brought up some strong feelings in you,
Yes.
that they would do that.
Should have stayed.
Well, when they came back, they were, a lot of them, they weren't even punished, and they did break the law. And at my age, when you got to high school, you had a couple choices. And one of them wasn't very good. And they just ran.
Yeah.
And then they let them back in with no punishment. I didn't think that was right.
No, it's not. I agree with you.
These bring up strong feelings, don't they? These senses of patriotism and loyalty.
I have seen friends and went to a friend's funeral that was killed over there. I mean, it just wasn't right,
Yeah, yeah.
in my opinion.
Oh,
I'm not agreeing with the war, but I just don't think they went about it in the right way. If you're not gonna go, just take your lumps, go to jail and get it over with. Don't run.
yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, we've had our tests and trials too in times of war, haven't we, as a nation, as a people?
Sure.
Let's read on. Let's read on. The feelings that those kind of situations for us have brought up are just as real here for the Philistines and for David and his men. Focus in on verse 6 for a second in chapter 29. I'm going to read that to you again. Then Achish called David and said to him, "As the Lord lives, you have been honest." Think back over what we've studied here about David. Has David been honest? Mark's going like this.
Well, he didn't tell the whole truth, but
Yeah.
That's the reason the Philistines, and he did go crazy once.
Yeah.
So they have a lot of doubt about him.
Yeah.
They don't really know.
Yeah. Do we want a crazy man leading 600 troops at our rear?
At our back.
Yeah.
That may flip at any time.
Yeah. Yeah, go
How
ahead.
could he be honest under the circumstance if somebody's trying to kill you all the time?
Well, Elby just
So
said,
that
take
ain't
your
got nothing to
lumps.
do- No, that ain't got anything to do with honor.
Elby just said, take your lumps.
No, but I mean, trying to kill him every day, so,
These are quandaries, aren't they?
yeah.
These are quandaries that we face. And David's struggling his way through those. We see, and I forgot to do this again, or did I put these in? Oh, I put this in.
Chapter 29.
Do we have some volunteers? I want to pass this out. I took out of the earlier lessons that we did some of the characteristics of David. Thank you, Diane. I'm going to give you that side. Brian, you take this side. Pass those out. We see David as a mixed character. There's so many wonderful things that there is to see about David. Look especially in the left column there. You see all these characteristics that come out of David early in his life. And then there's that little short column that has a few odd things in it.
Yes, we all have our faults, don't we?
We all have our faults. Yep. Yeah, in particular, we see some likely character flaws in David. At times he's a braggart, a good actor, and pretending he's crazy. That refers to that same incident, doesn't it? Where he's trying to escape the pressures of these Philistines. And he resorts to deception in order to do that. There's some of that that goes on also with between him and his wife Michal with the father Saul. I'm going to be expanding this list as we go along, looking at the characteristics of David here. But that's jumped out at me when Achish said, "You've been honest." Achish may mean you've been honest with me. Okay, you've been reliable with me. But we can't say absolutely that David has been honest in his dealings. He has not always done so. Let's read on now. Let's see, verses 7 through, verses 1 through 6 in chapter 30. This is a new trouble for David and his troops. Verses 1 through 6.
And it came to pass, David and his men would come to Ziklag on the third day that the Amorites had invaded the south, and Ziklag had smitten. Ziklag had burned it with fire, and had taken the women captive, and they were within. They slew not either great nor small, but carried them away and went on their way. So David and his men came to the city, and behold, it was burned with fire, and their wives and their sons and their daughters were taken captive. Then David and the people were with him lifted up their voices and wept until they had no more tears or to weep. And David's two wives had taken captive
Ahinoam
and Jezreel.
Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail.
Oh, I got Abigail.
Okay.
The wife of Nabal and Carmelite at the church. They were greatly distressed, for the people spare of the stoning him, because of the soul of all people were grieved, even men from his son and from his daughter. But David encountered himself in the Lord his God.
Okay, thank you. What is the new dilemma facing David and his troops? What's the new dilemma?
Their wives and children are taken captive.
Their wives and children are taken captive. Yeah, while they're away hanging out with the Philistines, these Amalekites, wasn't it? Amalekites come out. I believe they're east of the Jordan, so they must be raiding. They've come into the land, and they take the people captive. Do they kill the ladies and the children?
They take them for slaves.
They're taking them into slavery.
They sell into slavery also.
Yeah, so they would either do that, or if you were a cute young thing, one of the soldiers might set you aside and marry you. Okay? Israel even has rules about that. You'll see in the books of Moses, there are laws about it. So a dire situation for these women and children, isn't it? Very dire situation. And how are the men feeling about David at this point?
They want to stone him.
They want to stone him. Things are going from bad to worse here, aren't they? David was thrown out of Israel. He's been thrown out by the Philistines. Now he's being thrown out by his own men. It's about as bad as it gets for David. Unbelievable situation.
Well, he can look like he's impartial that way.
Say again?
He can look like he's impartial that way, not even to his own men.
Tell me more about what you mean, Ali. I'm not
His
getting
own men are throwing him out, just like Israel threw him out. He's not really taking sides.
Yeah, remember early on that it said Saul loved David, and David was the darling, and they're singing to him and all of this stuff. He's way on the other end of things now, isn't he? This is a remarkable well, we call it a fall normally.
But wasn't
of
that
a
right
leader.
after, wasn't that right after David took care of Goliath for him?
Yeah, that was right after the Goliath thing, yep.
Yep.
So things have changed dramatically, yeah.
Well, he wasn't responsible for that, the people being taken captive, it wasn't
Okay.
his fault. It was another situation that evolved because of what the army.
Okay, you're making a point. I'm gonna quote back to you though, a saying I learned from A Bug's Life.
A bug's life.
Yeah.
You get into bugs?
It's a movie, it's a kid's movie.
Oh,
It's a kid's movie. How does it go? It's something like, when you're a leader, everything's your fault.
That's true.
And it's true. If you're offering leadership and something goes wrong,
You're the blame.
you become the point of blame.
Sometimes they don't, but they should. I mean, when things go wrong, and if you're the leader, don't track down the least and beat him to death. Go to whoever gave that order.
Yeah, that's how things go in life. If you've ever been in a leadership position, that is how things go. When the other thing that happens is when everything's going well, even if you had nothing to do with it, you get credit for it, right? You get credit. But they're all wagging their fingers at David, and with the other hand, they're picking up stones. This is serious. This is a very, very awkward
At the
circumstance.
very least, he's got them perplexed.
Yes.
They don't know what he's doing.
They don't know what David's going to do next.
Yeah, right. So that might be a good place for him.
Boy, I can't imagine. I can't imagine somebody comes and takes away Susan and Gretchen,
And that you would be friends with him after that.
I'm talking about these Amalekites, what they've
Right,
done. Takes away Susan and Gretchen, and now Gretchen's got a baby, so that one's gone too, and just carries them away. And now, on top of that, the people who might be helping me are instead turning against me.
That'd be tough.
I can't imagine a lower point for David. This is really, really the bottom for David here, what that would be like. Let's see. Where does David turn? Look at verse 6. Where does David turn to solve this dilemma?
To God.
God,
He turns to God. He turns to God. Sometimes we don't learn to do that until life has kicked us to the curb, right? We don't learn to turn to God until everything has gone wrong and we hit that rock bottom.
Some people don't learn at all.
Some people never learn it, that's true.
And they turn for a short time, then they go back to their old ways.
Sure, they're fickle about it. But here we see David in his very worst moment, to this point, there'll be others, his very worst moment, and he turns to God. David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. Let's read about how that goes. Someone read for us verses 7 through 10. 7 through 10.
And David said to Abigail, or Abiathar the priest, Ahimelech's son, I pray thee, bring me hither to behold. And Abiathar brought me hither the
ephod. The ephod.
to David. And David inquired at the Lord, saying, shall I pursue after his troops? Shall I overtake them? And he answered him, pursue, for thou shalt surely overtake them without fail, recover all. So David went, he and the 600 men, and were him, and came to the brook Besor, where those that were left behind stayed. But David pursued, and he and 400 men, for 200 abode behind, which were so faint that they could not go over the brook Bazar.
Okay, so remember what happened with these troops. They've left the lines of the Philistines. They've traveled back to where their families were stationed, and now they're on the run again. trying to reach their enemies and to reach their families to deliver them, and some of the guys aren't up to it. Some of them just aren't up to that amount of travel and marching, whatever it was they're doing. Doesn't mention horses or donkeys here, so I'm guessing they're on foot. This is a rough experience, and some of the guys just can't do it. What is it that David seeks from Abiathar the priest in order to hear from God? The ephod. The ephod. I've drawn a picture of an ephod for you up here, what that might have looked like. We don't have pictures from the Old Testament, so we don't know absolutely.
Is that like a shield?
It looks a little bit like a shield, but imagine it as a garment.
Okay.
Okay? This is the front part, and then there'd be a back part, and you'd stick your arms through here.
Policeman's badge.
It's a policeman's badge. And your neck would be up here.
Okay.
Okay? So it's an outer or a covering garment.
Almost like a vest.
Almost like a vest that the priest would put on. And here's why he says, Abiathar, bring the ephod. Here's why he says it. Because what the priests would do is they would keep something called the Urim and the Thummim in their outer garment. There would be like a pocket inside of this piece of clothing, and they would keep this thing called the Urim and the Thummim. Have you ever heard of this before?
No.
Raise your hand if you've heard of it. Nobody's hand is going up. Okay. We don't know much about these. There's some little article that they would keep. And they were a form of lot for casting lots. Okay? The most recognized thing in our culture would be casting dice. Okay? That would be the most recognizable thing in our culture. Our dice, though, have 6 sides, and these seem not to have been that complex. But the priest would pull those out. He would hear the request of the person asking a question of God, and then he would cast the Urim and the Thummim, and the Urim and the Thummim would answer the question that has come from that leader. It's an answer from God. So it's a type of prayer, is what we would call it in the Old Testament. Okay? We don't do this today. Not very often.
So they cast lots for Jesus' clothing, didn't they?
That was the Romans.
Okay.
That was the Romans, and the Romans had dice. We find those in the archaeological digs.
Okay.
Our modern dice look just like a Roman die. And they would make a lot of bones. They look just the same. But this Urim and Thummim is a mystery to us. We don't have anything like it in our culture. It's an act of prayer, but it's described in the books of Moses. And it comes up from time to time, and this is where they would store it. And that's why David says, bring that thing to me.
You know,
That's what he's referring to. Go ahead.
Without, the telecommunications and everything that we have now, that was a lot of faith that these leaders put in the priest, that they're just going to roll these things on the ground and go, yep, you go do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a lot of faith.
Yes. Yeah. So when you see that expression in the Old Testament where it talks about inquiring of the Lord, there are times when that inquiring of the Lord, it doesn't mean I'm talking, having a conversation with the Lord. It means you're going to his priest, the high priest typically, and you're asking your questions, and he is interceding for you as he casts that Urim and Thummim. Yeah, it's an unusual, specifically Old Testament thing. I said we mostly don't do this, but I'm going to give you an example where I saw something like this done at a conference, at my suggestion. Now it's getting weird, right?
Did you get in trouble?
No. we were trying to figure out who the circuit counselor would be for the area that we were in. And they had voted twice, and both times the vote came up split. Exactly the same on both sides. And they were scratching their heads and saying, well, what should we do? We're supposed to be back in conference. We got to settle this. And both guys were there ready to serve. And I said, well, would you both concede to flipping a coin? And whoever comes up, you know, with whatever the coin toss was, that you would be the circuit counselor. And they both said, yes, we'll do that. So they flipped the coin, we prayed, they flipped the coin, and one of the guys was chosen, and we went back to work. So it's something like that. It's something like that, okay? Where if you're struggling to make a decision, you're trusting that God will be involved and help it. And the guy who got chosen was a great circuit counselor. The next year, the circuit divided because it had gotten so large, and the other guy became circuit counselor of the other place. So it all worked out. Yeah, this is a weird thing. If you get a chance, get your Bible dictionary out or look in your concordance and look up Urim and Thummim and read about it in the Old Testament. It's a special thing in the Old Testament. Okay, yeah.
Could you please spell those?
I was going to say no to you, Diane, but I'll try. How's that?
It'd be better than my try, I'll tell you that.
Hey, Pastor, here are my footnotes. It says they traveled 35 miles that day. 25 of it was a forced march.
Oh, okay, thank you for those numbers. We see why the guys are flagging, don't we?
That's right, that's why they're wore out.
Yeah, that's a long trek.
Right, especially 25 miles.
Yeah.
Forced march.
I'm not sure if there might be two R's in that. Urim and Thummim. There might be two M's in that.
Yep, 2.
You think there are two? You found it?
Yeah.
Okay. So two M's there. Two R's here?
Nope.
No, not two R's. Just
Not
Urim and
according to
Thummim.
Google.
Not according to Google. Yeah. And those are transliterations of the Hebrew words. Okay? There's nothing like it in our culture. So they're just giving us the Hebrew words because they don't know what else to do with it. Okay? It's a difficult thing. It's different from our culture. I'll just say it that way. But learn about that if you have a little time. I'll try to look it up this week as well. Let's carry on. Let's see. So David goes to the Abiathar. They use the Urim and Thummim. Most likely that's what's going on here. And then the answer that he gets from God, look at this, verse 8. And David inquired, shall I pursue after this band? Shall I overtake it? And notice the questions are in a form of yes or no answers. Okay, they're yes or no questions. And Abiathar would have thrown for the first one, shall I pursue this band? The answer is yes. Then he asks the second one, shall I overtake them? And once again, the answer is yes. And David takes this information, he believes that God has answered him, and he goes. He takes his men and he goes. Here we see David's faith, don't we? It's also a blessing that David's men are now thinking, oh, David's got a plan, he knows what he's doing, right? And we don't have to throw the stones at him.
The 200 he left behind, were they wounded, or it says they were faint? They were...
Yeah, Joe just mentioned they'd marched 35 miles that day. It's been a long time since I've marched 35 miles.
Yeah.
I don't know how I would hold up.
At about 3.
Yeah, at about 3. Yeah, I can go out and run 3 miles. I can do that, but 35, I think I'd be sitting by the baggage.
I said 25 of them was a forced march.
25 was a forced march, so they're
moving.
They're hurrying. They're hurrying, right? They're trying to catch up to these Amalekites, and they've got a high motivation, don't they? Their wives and children are taken, and that would move a lot of guys to, you know, force themselves that way, and yet sometimes the body just gives out, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The marathon runners talk about hitting the wall. okay? You get so far into your marathon, and what happens is all the sugar in your body that is reserved for exercise burns up. That's what the wall is. And the body has to transition from eating the sugar to eating your fat. And that's a harder chemical process for the body. And so the body starts feeling like, stop. Just stop.
Sit down.
Sit down, it's too much, I can't do this. So that's what these men are up against. And they drop where they're at there at the brook Besor. Let's have somebody read now verses 11 to 15. 11 to 15, see what happens next.
They found an Egyptian in the open country and brought him to David. And they gave him bread, and he ate. They gave him water to drink. And they gave him a piece of a cake of figs and 2 clusters of raisins. And when he had eaten, his spirit revived, for he had not eaten bread or drunk water for 3 days and 3 nights. And David said to him, "To whom do you belong, and where are you from?" He said, "I am a young man of Egypt, servant to an Amalekite, and my master left me behind because I fell sick 3 days ago. And we had made a raid against the Negeb of the Cherethites, and which belongs to Judah, and against the Negeb of Caleb. And we burned Ziklag with fire." And David said to him, "Will you take me down to this band?" And he said, "Swear to me by God that you will not kill me or deliver me into the hands of my master, and I will take you down to this band."
Okay, thank you. What do we learn about David as a military commander and as a human being in this moment with the Egyptian? What are we learning about David here?
He had empathy.
Okay,
He listened to him at least.
okay. Yeah, this guy apparently had the flu or something, right? And the Amalekite commander says, dump him. Just leaves him. And David stops and they give him a bunch of food, don't they? They give him all kinds of stuff. They feed this man.
He found a use for him, even though he was kind of spent.
Yeah, he's definitely spent. And but David takes the time to nurse him, so to speak, and then to listen to him and invite him. I suppose David's been doing this all along with people, hasn't he? These misfit people that he's been working with, bringing to his side and to his aid. And he brings him along. Jim?
Showed he was a man of good character. David.
David, man, good character here.
I
I wonder though, some of his men might have been saying, "You're feeding this Egyptian, and our people are still being carried away by the Amalekites." You know, they might have worried about that.
Yeah, he had to make the decision.
Yeah, I suppose though, after 35 miles of marching, they wouldn't have said that right away.
Unless he's in the Marine Corps.
Unless he's in the Marine Corps. Yeah, they take a pause here.
Sometimes, Pastor, at the very least, you can gain some knowledge because they're back here. They're the very least. They're looking at all things, and sometimes you can gain quite a bit of knowledge by talking to them.
Yeah. So he's trying to pick up. He could probably learn things about troop strength, right? He knows where they've gone, their position,
where they are.
He's learning a number of different strategic things by taking time to talk with this Egyptian. But a part of it is compassion. David could have gotten the information out of him, said this guy's dead weight, right? Slit his throat, dropped him right there. He's not part of David's company, but David doesn't take his life. Let's keep moving. Verses 16 to 20. 16 to 20. If someone would read, please.
And when he had brought him down, behold, they were spread abroad upon all the earth, eating and drinking and dancing, because of all the great spoil that they had taken out of the land of the Philistines, and out of the land of Judah. And David smote them from the twilight even unto the evening of the next day. And there escaped not a man of them, save 400 young men which rode upon camels and fled. And David recovered all that
Amalekites had carried away, and David rescued his 2 wives. And there was nothing lacking to them, neither small nor great, neither sons nor daughters, neither spoil nor a thing that they had taken to them. David recovered all. And David took all the flocks and the herds which they drave before those other cattle, and said, "This is David's spoil."
What do you think?
It worked out.
It worked out. Jim, I think that's an understatement. It is an amazing achievement here, isn't it? This is an amazing achievement. David gets rid of all of these Amalekites, or there's some of the, are there some that escape? A few escape, right? Certain run off, but he gets rid of these Amalekites. He recovers all of the people, as well as all these goods. Verse 19, nothing was missing, whether small or great, sons or daughters, spoil or anything that had been taken. These Amalekites must have packed well, and then fled. David recovers, and his men recover all of this. Imagine what this means for the relationship between David and his men. Think about what it was when they got back and found all of the family missing and all their goods taken. Everything's gone. They're ready to stone David. It's that bad. And now the elation that would follow as David, by God's grace, is able to bring about this victory and rescue their families. Just a remarkable turn of events. I put this up on the board here. Let's calculate for a minute. What time of day is twilight?
It says in my notes, says twilight can be dusk or dawn.
It can be dusk or dawn, okay? So it's going from twilight to the next evening.
I would think morning, maybe.
Maybe it's morning in this case,
Well,
or if it's the next evening, maybe it's the evening twilight.
yeah.
Yeah, I think you might be right, Margaret.
That would be 24 hours then,
Yeah, well, yeah.
around 24 hours.
It would be around 24 hours. So I wanted to calculate that because this is apparently how long the engagement was with these Amalekites, how long the fighting took place. Put yourself back in David's sandals along with his men. They've done a forced march of how many miles?
35.
They've gone 35 miles. Well, 25 forced march.
Right,
But they've
35 miles total.
they've traveled 35 miles total. They've caught up to these Amalekites, and they fought with them for 24 hours. This is almost superhuman, isn't it?
Yep.
This is almost superhuman to be able to do this.
Well, they were trying to get their families and everything back so that they would have the incentive of it.
Okay, and the other guys might have been drunk.
Well,
Right, 'cause they're partying and
They were
dancing.
partying, yeah.
They're partying and dancing. But still, they put up quite a fight. 24 hours is a long engagement. That's a very long engagement that David leads these fellows through. Let's see where we're at. We're about to finish here. I'm going to read here from the end to get us to the end of our chapter here. Verse 21, that David came to the 200 men who had been too exhausted to follow David and who had been left at the brook Besor. And they went out to meet David and to meet the people who were with him. And when David came near to the people, he greeted them. Then all the wicked and worthless fellows among the men who had gone with David said, because they did not go with us, we will not give them any of the spoil that we have recovered, except that each man may lead away his wife and children and depart. Interesting circumstance here, isn't it? But David said, you shall not do so, my brothers. Interesting expression here. He calls them his brothers. Brothers. Brothers in arms, for sure. With what the Lord has given us. He has preserved us and given into our hand the band that came against us. who would listen to you in this matter? For as his share is who goes down to the battle, so shall his share be who stays by the baggage. They shall share alike. And he made it a statute and a rule for Israel from that day forward to this day. So whenever Samuel, or this book of Samuel was being written, this was still the rule that prevailed in David's later kingdom. Once again, we see a little bit about David here, don't we? In the sense of what's fair and what's right. Even though those other guys did not go all the way with him to the battle. And you can see how the guys who did, who've been fighting for 24 hours and turn around and come back, you can see how they were saying, we ought to be getting all this stuff and they shouldn't be getting any. You can understand that mind, can't you?
It's kind of like the prodigal son story in the New Testament, yeah, where the son who stays behind is like, wait, why does he get a party? He left and squandered everything.
I've done my duty. He has not. How can he share in the blessings? And David says, well, they can, and they should, and they must.
He said all for one, one for all.
All for one for all. I don't know if I'd necessarily read that into the Bible, but because that gets used in different ways. But we do see David showing regard for all of his people, don't we? They were all contributing as they could to the best of their ability.
The weakest.
And David, and these were the weaker ones. They couldn't make it all the way, and yet David makes sure that they partake in the reward. Yeah, there's a fairness thing going on here. Yeah.
I don't know if this would be synonymous with valorous when it comes to the characteristics of David, but I noticed that I don't think selfless was a part of the characteristics. I mean, to say that they also get some of the spoils of selflessness.
Yeah, when David comes away from the Amalekites, people are saying, well, this is all David's spoil. Right? That's one of the first things that gets said there. But David sees that it's distributed. And it goes back to the property owners. David comes through this in remarkable shape, doesn't he? This was probably the lowest moment in David's life, to this point anyway. And he comes through in remarkable shape, and we see some of that character again. We'll have to make notes about that character next time we get together. Let's bow our heads and have a prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you that in the most challenging moments of our lives, you are ready to listen. You are ready to answer, to guide, and direct our hearts, our minds, our lives. Lord, teach us this day that when those hardships come, that we turn to you rather than from you, that we entrust ourselves to you rather than run from you. Give us this characteristic, this heart of David, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.